Okay, I want to get into philosophy here surrounding the understanding of the metamodern, and to do that, I want to first talk about the philosophy of science, positivism. Um, that's what the modern world was all about. It was about having things that were verifiable, true, and testable. Um, Scientifically, what the postmodern was about running out of things to test, running out of things to deduce. So we had to determine new methods which were beyond the realm of science. So what did we do? We started to tell stories that we couldn't prove. We came up with theories that that make sense to people, that feel real. So essentially, that's the oldest way of collecting knowledge is telling stories, right? That's the idea behind myth. All of our stories since the beginning of time, um, surrounding creation, ethics, taboos, meaning, all began as stories. So the 20th century mythologist Joseph Campbell wrote "Hero with a Thousand Faces," and he connects mythology, specifically hero mythology, um, to the world across time. So everywhere in the world, he can sort of synthesize these ideas of myth, telling stories about how humanity should understand things, knowledge, across time and across cultures. So um, they were just metaphors for how we should live. Um, the change in the postmodern, though, was that we weren't offering objective stories. We were injecting ourselves into these stories. So these myths were now, um, we were they were subjective because they were part of our story. Um, so the before the postmodern, you had direct intent, good and evil, gods and monsters. Um, there was a clear differentiation of opposites, essentially. Um, the postmodern says that um, there's no more direct intent because the only way we know intention is through words, and words themselves are subjective because words mean different things to different people. So we're giving power to words. Um, so if somebody says something, do they even mean it? Can we take their word for it, even if they're so we're talking about, we're questioning intention, we're questioning words, we're questioning everything, um, and this is a subconscious, mind you. So this is not something that people are thinking about. This is something that's sort of Freudian, that is what philosophers are talking about. So um, so history itself, the understanding of history becomes different. It was in the modern era. It was an archaeology, meaning there was an objective dissection based on a point of view where we can test things and understand. We come up with the story based on uh, the the scientific um, dissection of what was going on. The postmodern says that history itself is so complex that it's not real. It's not a truth. It's too big to understand. Essentially, even if we have um, opposing viewpoints and we try to synthesize it together, a traditional historical perspective does us no good. So instead of an archaeology, we start to refer to a genealogy with all the complexities, with all the contradictions, with all the systems for different disciplines coming together to start to tell new truths, stories, um, that were leading to new understandings of reality. So, and that leads to our present circumstances. Postmodern philosophy was essentially about using existential philosophy, which came to popularity in the late 19th century. It's the examination of individual existence and meaning, and they're telling the new myths, which were now required in this new cultural era. So really the tale of 20th century philosophy is the large battle was the analytic tradition versus the continental tradition in philosophy. So a good example of the analytic tradition would be Bertrand Russell, the theory of knowledge. How do we know what we know? A lot of logic based, mathematically based, naturally science based, epistemology, the theory of knowledge. How do we know things? How do we know things are true? So that's positivism. That's trying to get down to the objective truth. The analytical philosophers were still contemplating science into the mid 20th century. Continental philosophers said that there's people that are over there doing science just fine. We're the philosophers, and we're trying to explain things that can't be explained through science. So we're onto something bigger than analytical philosophers talking about logic and if A and B and C were true, and they didn't care about this stuff. They cared about the stories. So they asked the questions, these continental philosophers, what's too big for science, because that's what we're gonna go after. So right there is where philosophy essentially died, and it split, and there was never really any optimistic hope for putting it back together. So I think right there is another opportunity for the postmodernists to synthesize these two different disciplines that, because of the cultural era where they found themselves in the postmodern, there was no path to put these things together. So just another opportunity. I think it's important to understand philosophy from the scientific perspective and what was going on here. So I'm going to pick back up here with generational theory in just a minute. Thanks.